So part of, just to give a little bit of frame of reference of why we're having this presentation is that as we move in as a watershed group, we've been meeting as a steering committee for almost 2 years now. And we're kind of moving into planning to try to come up with a restoration plan for the Lower Priest River. And as a first step towards that, we're going to focus in on the East River because it's smaller, still drainage, it has a lot of value. But the East River also has a fair amount of private land ownership and some ag. And so there's opportunities for landowner partnerships. And these ladies know a lot about partnering on, working on our streams and waterways. So they're going to speak a little bit about those partnership opportunities and how landowners can benefit our waterways with actions with their property. So.
Okay, so the program that I work for is the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, and we provide technical and financial assistance to landowners who are interested in restoring fish and wildlife habitat on their land. Next one. Thank you so much, Erin. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm sorry. Nice. So who can participate? It's any private landowner, and that includes tribal and local municipalities. It's just not state and federal land. Projects are voluntary, and participating landowners, they continue to own and manage their land to serve their needs while improving conditions for fish and wildlife. So we work together with landowners to find where our objectives can align. Thank you. Okay, how the program works. So the landowner works with me as the partner's biologist, and we work with a local cooperator. And the local cooperator is who it is that we set up an agreement, and they hold the partner's funding. And so they cut the checks. And so an example of those local cooperators that we work with in this area, the Soil Water Conservation District, Idaho Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We worked with the tribe before, just others. Which sometimes the local cooperator can also be the landowner in the case of like tribal. Okay, so the landowner's role, they enter into a landowner agreement, which is basically a formal handshake that outlines roles and responsibilities, financial obligations, who's responsible for what. And it also says that the landowner they will maintain the habitat for at least 10 years. That is, they won't undo what it is that we put in. Acts of nature, they're covered. If something's not working as we intended, we'll go back in there and help them fix it. And also the landowner agreement, it just states that the landowner will allow access with advanced notification for implementation and monitoring. Okay, so my program, it does come with funding. It is somewhat limited, both in the amount that we're able to provide on a landowner project, and then just within a year, how much we have for a budget. So often I leverage that funding with other partners, including Cindy with NRCS. You know, there are other funding grants out there, NIFWIF proposals, working with various partners. And that's something that I can bring into a project, is finding those funds to leverage. So we target a 50-50 cost share, but that's flexible, and that can be in kind, and the match can come from federal, state, from anyone. Okay, so we don't have an application process. Typically, landowners throughout the year that are interested in potentially doing a partners project will talk, and we'll see how it is that it would potentially fit into our priorities. So my program, we focus in certain areas of the state, certain focal areas. The Priest River falls within our Selkirk Cabinet Yaak, where one of our priorities is stream and wetland riparian restoration to benefit. We focus on federal trust species, which those are your threatened and endangered species, migrant birds, and at-risk species. So definitely bull trout, to a lesser extent West Slope cutthroat trout, but also a lot of these riparian projects. I mean, they benefit migrant birds, pollinators, other terrestrial wildlife that may be utilizing those that are threatened and endangered. Thank you. Okay, this just outlines the services that I provide as a partners biologist. Everything from project management, from the inception to the delivery of the project, you know, from planning, implementing, monitoring, or we could just help out with permitting, right? Like if a federal nexus is triggered, we could help with permitting. Also identifying other partners and funding sources. Types of projects that we do, again, stream wetland restoration, lots of different habitats we work in. Thank you. So now I'm just going to provide a couple examples of techniques that we employ on some of these projects. So low-tech process-based restoration. The purpose of LTPBR is to restore streams and rivers to their natural state by mimicking natural processes and functions. These are pictures from Bismarck Meadows, which is up by Nordman. In this instance, we set out to mimic beavers. And by doing that, we construct dam analogs, beaver dam analogs by pounding in posts, weaving in vegetation, packing with mud. And what that does is that slows and spreads the hydrology out. And these areas, like Bismarck Meadows, was drained and ditched for agriculture, so it's cut off from its floodplain, right? And so it's reconnecting that hydrology to the floodplain and getting the benefit, improving the habitat that way. In this instance, you can see this is a year later, the living wall of vegetation. Those are all willows there that we use to help use as part of the weaving material in the structure, and that's also another objective that we aim for in areas where a landowner is open to beaver reestablishment, is increasing the forage base for beavers to reoccupy that habitat, because they build them better, right? They know where to engineer these things, free labor, and they definitely can restore the hydrology. A well-placed beaver can. Next slide. Okay, large wood. Large wood is often a limiting factor in our streams. Large wood, we consider adding roughness, and that helps to slow the flow, sort different sediment types, creates pools and cover and feeding areas for trout. Example on the left here, this is from Trestle Creek, working with Fish and Game using Clark Fork settlement dollars, and this was just tipping trees, felling trees into the creek. The picture on the right, this comes from Pritchard Creek, which Aaron was the project manager on, or still is, right? Like it's still, yeah, it still is. And so that project is it like 3 miles, 1,700 pieces of wood? Yeah.
And it's like maybe around 2,000 logs.
Large scale project, but a lot of wood. And the way that this was engineered, the engineer on this was Interfluve, is you only see one post in this picture, but to help prevent it from drifting into areas that perhaps shouldn't be, there are things that can be done, right? Like you can ballast with rock, you can ballast with other trees, you can use wood to pin these structures into place. So just, you know, depending on the amount of risk you can assume, right, you can do different things with wood. Okay, this is, so channel reconnection. This is working with the Kootenai Tribe River Design Group up in Deep Creek. And what you can see here is all of these light blue scrolls, and those are where the channel used to be. And so they're abandoned or oxbow channels. And so what we're trying to do here is reconnect some of those features. And what that provides is it provides rearing habitat for juvenile fish, also helps to attenuate flooding. Yeah, it's a lot of our streams, they are straightened, they're entrenched. And so this is to try to connect some of that side habitat so those rearing fish, they don't get blown out. They've got habitat to feed in, get bigger, etc. Then riparian re-veg, it's a big one. And in our area with riparian vegetation, oftentimes we're dealing with weeds. So down in the picture to the left there, monocultures of reed canary grass, right? Like you would think that just planting would be relatively straightforward, but things that you have to consider is prepping the site, and then you plant them, and then preventing weeds from getting, growing up, and then fencing, right? And so, a plant that from the store costs $8 can end up costing, dozens of dollars when you think about weed control and ungulate and beaver browse protection. This is another type of technique that we employ are the brush clusters. So what you see in here, these are actually willow cuttings. You can take those cuttings, you can harvest them, and you can put them in the appropriate soil and they'll grow again. So what we do is we bundle them within conifer as a protector, right? And then you use an excavator, dig a hole, and stuff that in there.
Is that good? Are you ready?
This is, yep, absolutely, thank you. And then I think just the last one, right, is fish passage barrier removal, culvert replacement. This was down in Big Cedar Creek down in the Clearwater, and you've got this perched culvert here, was preventing steelhead to 8 miles of access upstream, replacing that with a bottomless arch culvert, and then reconstructing the channel within there, so you reconnect habitat, and then they're able to access spawning habitat up above there. So that's Clear Creek. It's really, yeah, that's it. Oh, and for more information, yeah, that's how to get a hold of me.
And then, much like Brittany, my program is similar. So I work for the Natural Resource Conservation Service. We are a subset of the U.S. Department of Ag, so our monies come from the Farm Bill through Congress. And then what Brittany and I work together quite a bit is, Brittany will do the culvert and we will re-veg the surrounding upstream, downstream areas. So that way we can get more done, and it costs a little less just because we've got the funds to be able to do it. And so then I've got 4 planners that work out of my office with me, so they can come help do the inventory, do a site assessment. What's the cause of the problem? Are we addressing the problem with the appropriate practices? That's a big thing that we focus on. And so a little different than Brittany's program is, so our stuff isn't a, you give in kind, or we have a contract that says we'll pay $50 a foot for riprap, and if it costs you $75 a foot, then we start talking to other partners about how to offset that cost. But at the end of the day, the difference is on the landowner. And so they can be creative in how they come up with that, or, like I said, ideally we can partner with partners to help offset some of that cost. And then the other part of what we work on is easements. So wetland easement and ag land easements are a big part of what we do, but not everybody likes easements. And so that's kind of the nice thing, is where we have what we call the EQIP program, where we identify a resource, eroding bank, fish passage, culvert, that kind of thing, and then we, again, plan the practices to address it. So, yeah, pretty much it. If there's any questions, I do have some cards I'll leave with you guys, but.
How do people find, I just am always intrigued with, how do people hear about the opportunities for NRCS, and how do landowners normally get to you?
A lot of what we do is word of mouth. So again, we will work in one area, and the neighbor will like what they've seen, and they will call us, or they'll start calling around and they find us, is typically how we do it. Outreach events like this. because we don't work just in streams or with T&E species. We work on all lands and all species. So we work on fuels reductions, fire, forest health, livestock mitigations, anything, improving water for livestock, grazing plans, nutrient management plans for crops, cover crops for ag fields and pasture land, pollinator habitats. So we do a lot of different things. I want to say we have 900 practices that we're able to install. Not that we will, but those are the big things that we end up working on. But like I said, a lot of it's just word of mouth of,
For a private landowner that's interested in the stream restoration project and the partnership, who's the first contact for them to make? Is it with NRCS or is it with Fish and Wildlife?
It won't matter. Brittany and I work closely enough that if you call one and I know her program, she knows mine. If hers won't fit or she knows mine is needed to complement hers, like I said, we work close enough together that you'll get the same response from either one of us, which is, I think, helpful. Same goes for if you talk to any one of my planners in the office. Like I said, I've got 4 of them. If they don't know, they know how to get a hold of me. And then, like I said, we do work with the Bonner Soil and Water Conservation District, so ideally they are doing the same, where they don't have the resource or they know how to get in contact with us. But if you just Google NRCS, the directory for the state comes up, and they've changed that system, so I'm not a huge fan of it. I don't really direct people there just because each state had their own website, and the national office said, let's do one template, and now not all the links work. So they are fixing it, but we have an office in Bonners Ferry, and then we also have an office in Sandpoint that covers, Preach River. So.
Can you guys give us an idea of how many private landowners in the Priest Basin are taking advantage of this program?
Like actively, currently? So right now I'm working on just Bismarck Meadows, I think, in the Priest, but there have been others.
We wrote 125 contracts this year for NRCS.
Is there a recognized resource for entry-level folks on revegetation streams? Is there a textbook or classic?
There
paper?
is, and it's a short pamphlet. I'll have to figure out the name and I'll get it to you.
Your technical bulletins, is that what you're talking about?
Those, but there's another one that's just, I think the Forest Service put it out a while ago, but it covers the low-tech restoration work and native willow introduced grass. It touches on that, and then just because you see an undercut bank doesn't mean it's bad, and it touches on that.
So do you guys cover landowners that are in the watershed in the Priest Lake Ranger District but are in Washington?
That would come out of Washington unless we made an agreement with the Washington NRCS to say, hey, this is in our watershed, let my office handle it. I haven't reached out to Washington yet, so I'm not sure how much overlap or how much is going to come into play there.
So would you reach out to the Washington?
I think if the steering committee or if the group identifies a critical person, then I can work with you guys to help identify that or facilitate, hey, this is what's been going on, we need your help. Just because we are a national program doesn't mean we all administer it the same. Our local work group, so local groups have decided, that my funds that I get allocated to Bonner and Boundary County each year, 10% of that's going to restoration for, streams. Washington may not have that much allocation, so again, I don't know.
I have a question, Dennis.
it's not your organizations, but does anybody know, maybe you know who did the Amazing Pollinator Islands at the Pack River Delta? Does anybody?
Idaho Fish and Game did a lot of, yeah.
That island, it had so many bumblebees, they were frantic to get from one plant to another. They were just, and the whole thing, on the outside of it, they put willow and something else to keep the geese from getting in there.
Yeah.
There's like chamomile and Indian blanket and some bee balm. It is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I know they're on like what, phase 2 or phase 3 of the Delta, but yeah, it's Idaho Fish and Game that's the lead on that. Yeah. And then, you know, part of what we have is we have standard conservation practice standards. So it says, okay, this you shall do stream bank, and if you want to address habitat, this is your additional criteria that you need to meet and that kind of stuff. And so we have a lot of standard stuff that's tailored to our area.
Do you feel like landowners, when they come to you, they like understand, they have no, so they have, they're just gonna
Yeah.
go in and kind of.
Yeah, it's all over the board, and that's where Brittany and I can work really well together, is identify where that landowner is in the education realm of what we're doing, because we have better success with projects if the landowner understands. And understands is a loose concept, so I can plan a thinning for somebody because they want to thin their forest for forest health. But if I don't have them understand why a certain tree needs to come out over another tree, they just see that trees have come out. And so that's where our biggest hurdle as NRCS is working to overcome some of that. But luckily, we've got this group to help with that.
Yeah. Hopefully. That's part of the goal. Okay.
Can you both of you walk us through a typical situation? I'm a property owner with 1,000 feet of frontage on the lower Pack Rivers. There's a lot of undercutting banks and erosion and that sort of thing. I call one or both of you, and walk us through the steps then that you would take with that land.
And so this just happened the other day. I'm currently working on a detail in another state, and so our landowner reached out to me. I sent it to my lead planner in the office, and I said, reach out to Brittany. Those two went out into the field together. They took the district administrator, because if it becomes a project, they need to see it as well. So they did an inventory between the three of them. What does the site have? What does the site need? And whose program can cover it? In this particular case, it was just a guy wanted to save his beachfront lot. So it wasn't really a concern of ours, and it's not really something we can address. We can help them with permitting a little bit if they want to make it more wildlife friendly, not just a straight rock job, or if they, you know, how to place the rock is a big thing. I don't know if, I haven't spent a lot of time on the Priest River drainage as much to know if somebody just dumps rock in and they're like, oh, it's fine, and then in 3 years, like, oh, I guess we got to put more rock into it. That seems to be kind of common in other places throughout the county. Is that kind of what you're diving at?
Yeah. And then on that initial site visit, what would really just immediately jump out to you and say, yes, this is a project we want to work with the landowner on? What types of things would kind of trigger that?
The biggest thing is landowner understanding and flexibility, just because you're spending taxpayer dollars on private lands, so you have to document where and why that's going. So it's not like, here's a check, go do good things. There's some steps that have to go involved, and just patience. Like I said, we try pretty hard to help them understand the process and what's going on, but we're people and we make mistakes. So.
And it also needs to be a habitat project, right? So as far as, because that's a common request, is to come and see eroding banks. And again, rivers, streams and rivers, they naturally erode, right? And so then we look at, is this an unnatural rate of erosion? If we were to include habitat components, I mean, is there going to be a direct benefit to the species that are in there, right? Or would it actually be better for the river to continue to do what it does?
Yeah, the biggest thing is, especially on the pack, is identifying what's normal. You know, the pre drainage will be a little bit different. You know, we all know it's incising and trying to restabilize. So how do we work with normal geofunctions to not do more bad things? You know, the worst thing that we can do is just put rock in, because you just pushed the water's force to your neighbor. So job security, I suppose, but we're not fixing anything. You know, we've looked a lot, and I think there's getting to be more and more, as LIDAR gets more and more, a lot more connection to old historic oxbows. So you're getting the water out. I'm a little nervous on what that means in IDWR world as far as water stuff, but we'll worry about that later.
Anything else? Yeah, Sean.
Hey, Brittany.
Hey.
You mentioned that the partners can fund up to $25,000 project. I take it there is a cap in your funding.
Yes.
And is it appropriate to let us know what in a typical year, how much you guys have in a pot of money to dish out?
I'd say for me personally, 75. I'd say 75. So three projects. But again, a lot of what I do is there's zero financial input that I put into some projects, right? Like, I mean, it's instead like helping with grants, right? Because there are those that have deeper pockets. And so hooking landowners up with who that may be. And again, I mean, if it's a priority project, typically those funds are out there.
Got another one for you. So you mentioned that projects cannot take place on federal or state lands. But you also mentioned that the partners would be available to work on permitting if there was a federal nexus. So if you can't do projects on federal land, how is there?
The Corps triggers it all the time on stream projects, right? So, and to help to streamline the Corps process, that's one way. And then also in the restoration realm, I have practitioners and partners reach out to me, and then I get a hold of my colleagues, and we, even though it's on public land, help them to, there's one programmatic that I'm responsible for, that's for restoration projects, right? So if we can become substantially involved on those federal projects, and yeah, then we can use that tool. So yeah, just connecting, yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you guys. Super good information.
testing.
That's good.
All right. So I'm Ken King. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the Coeur d'Alene office. I'm a biologist, and I deal with bull trout and Section 7 a lot. So this will be talking about bull trout and the Endangered Species Act and Priest River. I'm going to kind of briefly go over some stuff. We can have some discussions afterwards. I don't know how far you want to get into things because it's quite frankly dry and boring. And I'm going to guess IGFG already covered a lot about the species. So I'm going to give it a quick kind of top level overview, and then we can have a discussion and I can answer questions. So starting out, bull trout are a mostly piscivorous char that likes to live in nice cold water. They can either be resident and never leave their home streams, or migratory, where they either stray or go into new streams and make spawning runs. They can move hundreds of miles in a few months, and they're extremely plastic in their behavior, meaning they're quite adaptable, and at different locations you find them doing all sorts of weird stuff. This right here is a picture of a bull trout in the Middle Fork East River up by you guys that we found on a red survey. So a brief history of listing and what's going on with bull trout. It was originally listed in 1998 as a threatened species. Had a draft recovery plan in 2002, 5-year review in 2004, litigation, first designation of critical habitat 2005, litigation, final designation of critical habitat in 2010, more 5-year reviews, and there's one that should be coming out fairly soon. It's a very wide-ranging species, and it's listed at the coterminus, which I'll get into here in a couple slides. So, the bull trout and Priest River come from Lake Pend Oreille. Lake Pend Oreille is a big lake, as I'm sure all of you know, and it has some fairly big bull trout. Let's see, I think the record here was 32 pounds in 1949, but I think this is somebody with around a 31-inch, was caught in 2020, when it was also fairly big bull trout. Oh, sorry, not doing it. So there's a picture of the guy with the big bull trout, a picture of Lake Pend Oreille. So, getting on to what is coterminus. So both bull trout and bull trout critical habitat are listed at the coterminus level. So this includes everything south of the Canadian border, and it's shown here, and it goes into Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Nevada, and Montana. So also, these different colors are the recovery units. So each of these is kind of geographically separated from the others, have a little bit of independence. These were originally thought of kind of unique stocks, but it never went that far because they're listed at the coterminus. There is, that's getting into technical stuff, I can hit that later. So then each of those recovery units is further broken down into core areas. Each core area may have multiple populations, such as the Lake Pend Oreille, or a single population. That's complex or simple core areas. And then Lake Pend Oreille is unique because it's actually broken down into 3 subunits, A, B, and C. You guys are in B, and those are basically where the dams are. You got Albany Falls and Cabinet Gorge, which they've recently been putting in fish passage in Cabinet Gorge, but they're basically hard stops for the fish. They were migration barriers. So here's red counts. They've been going on for a long time in Lake Pend Oreille. Not doing hot right now. There's a lot of fluctuation. You can see the 20-year, 10-year average. This is just all streams. And those are led by IDFG on an annual basis. So, general life history for adfluvial bull trout, like you find around you, is they rear for around 1 to 3 years in their spawning and rearing streams, where they try to hang out in the bottom and hide in and under stuff. They eat fish and invertebrates in those streams. Then they leave the spawning stream, they move into Lake Pend Oreille and do unknown things until they're large enough to eat kokanee, mainly as a prey fish. And just for reference, they around 8.5 inches or so when they leave on average. But there's really not much known about kind of the early life history, especially in lakes. And then once they get big enough to be munching down on those kokanee and other kind of larger fish, they are mostly piscivorous. So then here's kind of a quick, they move up into spawning streams, starting in the summer, and then they spawn in September and October and return. You kind of see the spawning migration up here in brown, and then basically they rear year-round in their spawning and rearing streams. And then in their forage areas, they're year-round in the forage areas. They tend to get flushed out with rain events, but they can be flushed out, leave their spawning and rearing streams basically any time year-round. So here's a quick rundown of generally what the migration pattern for the bull trout in Priest Lake looks like. They come from wherever in Lake Pend Oreille, and then they go down the Pend Oreille River, up the Priest River, and then we actually monitor in Middle Fork East River and Ulita Creek, which is highlighted up there on the right. However, there has been documented bull trout caught in Big Creek as well, which is below it. Here's the Middle Fork East River reds. You can see there's kind of a similar trend as Lake Pend Oreille. There's been a little bit fewer in recent years, but they've kind of been doing a completely different axis. So take note of that. You're looking at 100 versus 80 here-ish reds. But yeah, they've had some pretty good runs later when Lake Pend Oreille wasn't doing so hot. So, getting on to I guess if we have any questions before I dive into ESA side of the house, just on general bull trout and migrations and that sort of stuff, I'd be happy to take them now.
I missed the definition of co-terminal. Is that what the word was?
Coterminous, that's everywhere, everywhere that's in the connected United States. So basically saying excluding Alaska, the Pacific Islands, and yeah. So it's the connected United States, the lower 48. Does that answer?
I just say, I think coterminous is just a way of saying like within that region of the continental US.
So co doesn't mean they're partner with something, land or fish or, okay.
I don't, I think it's just a general term just to speak about that area. Yeah.
Which is also to say Canada is not included in that.
True.
So Canada, Mexico, any territories, that's not included. It's just the 48 connected US states.
All right, I think we're good. Yeah, we got other questions though.
Since we're talking about Priest River specifically, due to the fall drawdown of Priest Lake, we basically have 2 runoff events a year instead of the traditional spring runoff. Does that fall runoff have any effect on bull trout, either habitat or migration of fish?
I'm sure it does. To what extent, it'd be fantastic to know. We don't actually have any sort of research arm to bring up these sort of questions to rely on. So it would have to go through some sort of an external agency. We've documented this kind of strange reverse migration, but with IDFG, I think in 2006. But overall, bull trout is not financially important like Pacific salmon, and it's not a charismatic species. So there's still lots of data gaps in what happens with the species as a whole, and a lot more when it comes to a one-off like Priest River.
And
Anything else? All right. Moving forward.
Okay, the more boring stuff. So endangered species has 7A1, 7A2. It has more, but that's when you're talking about endangered species consultations. That's kind of what you're getting into. So 7A1, just to mention it, to get it out of the way, directs agencies to utilize their authorities to further the purpose of the ESA. There is no funding or solid direction given for this, and that's where that stands. 7A2 is consultation. That's when you think of ESA consultation, that's what you're talking about. So it requires a federal action agency to consult with the Fish and Wildlife Service or NIMS to ensure that any action authorized, funded, or carried out by the agency is not likely to jeopardize the continued existence of any listed species or result in the destruction or adverse mod of critical habitat. That applies to all actions with discretion. And discretion basically means if Congress said you will do this in this location in this way, then that's not discretionary. That sounds like lawyer speak. That's because it is. It's straight out of the ESA. So that's kind of what we're bound by. An action is anything authorized, funded, or carried out in whole or in part by a federal agency in the U.S. or upon the high seas. So it's pretty much anything that money is given to, people work on, or that is permitted. Just something to bring up here, that consultation is not a value judgment. It's just kind of running the scorecard. These are the effects. Some are beneficial, some are not. It is what it is, moving on, and you kind of document the changes. So, getting into the words. Jeopardy, if you want to know what that is, it's to engage in an action that is reasonably expected to directly or indirectly reduce appreciably the likelihood of both the survival and the recovery of a listed species in the wild. And destruction or adverse mod, that deals with critical habitat. It's something that means to directly or indirectly alter and appreciably diminish the value of critical habitat as a whole for the conservation of a listed species. So, kind of going back this, those two are done at this level here. So you can see with the wide-ranging species, if you're looking at what is the effect at this level, a lot of stuff doesn't reach that, just ever. So to get in the process, so we, either NIMPS or the service, consult with the federal action agency or a designated non-federal representative given by the action agency. There's a lot of confusion on this and different interpretations by federal action agencies, but basically there's no legal mechanisms for us to really consult with individuals. That's why you have Brittany and other people kind of stepping in to work on private lands, since the ESA was never intended or considered to work between private individuals and federal government. Because as you saw with the Jeopardy, it's so the government doesn't jeopardize the continued existence of the ESA species.
Can you take a question on that right now?
Sure, yeah.
So what you're saying is that Fish and Wildlife Service has no jurisdiction to enforce ESA on private or state or publicly owned lands?
If there's a federal nexus, which was mentioned earlier, which means if something is authorized, funded, permitted, or carried out by the federal action agency, then the action agency, even on private lands, has to consult on it. So if you wanted to do something that required no permit and you got no money from the federal government, and there is one caveat that you can't kill listed species. So as long as those boxes are checked, there is no consultation. No problem. It's a learning experience. I grew up in Oregon. I heard tons about the ESA, and the stuff you hear just generally doesn't necessarily describe, once you get in the nuts and bolts, how it functions. So yeah, NIMPS deals with marine species. We deal with terrestrial and freshwater species. So for instance, a majority. So Pacific salmon dealt with through NIMPS even though they're found in freshwater. Bears, bull trout, wolves, that sort of stuff all falls under us. And it isn't unusual to actually have to consult with both agencies in situations where they overlap, but only on different species. So as long as there's that federal nexus that I discovered, then interagency consultation, which is that 7A2, is triggered if any action may affect the species. If the action agency determines the action will have no effect to the species, then there is no consultation as well. As I said before, the purpose of the consultation is to determine if the action will jeopardize the continued existence of a species or result in the destruction or adverse mod of the species. Once again, these are both going to be at the coterminous level for bull trout. That's the exact same slide. I just put it there because it's good to think through that. So kind of the purpose of these consultations is to identify a means, a way basically that we can work with the action agency if they were willing to lessen the impacts of their actions, and to identify the extent, so then we can see kind of how things are trending overall. If it does get to jeopardy, then we are allowed to identify reasonable and prudent alternatives to that action. So a way in which that same action can be done but not result in jeopardy to the species. And then the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and NIMPS, once consultation is done, I mentioned before that you cannot take a listed species, which is kill, harass, hunt, target, shoot, trap. I can get into that if needed. It's another bunch of stuff straight from regulation. And once consultation is done, it provides exemption to that take of the species, as long as it's not the intent to take the species. So if you need to build a bridge and you happen to kill some listed species, that otherwise illegal act is no longer prohibited. And then it provides a record. So before you go through that whole process, there is an off-ramp, which is if there's no effect, then you don't have to consult. If it's not likely to adversely affect, which means you are not likely to have effects. So there are 3 types of non-adverse effects. It's kind of set up weird. I'll just explain it. Wholly beneficial, which means every single part of it is positive. You almost never see those. Even fantastic restoration projects that are really needed usually have 1 or 2 things which aren't the greatest in the second sort of aspect. Insignificant means not meaningful measure, and discountable means extremely unlikely to occur. Once again, those are regulatory legal words. And then if it's likely to adversely affect, it means it's not those. So here's that take. I was saying, Section 9 says you can't take listed species, which is to harass, harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, collect, or attempt to do any such. And that remains illegal, whether consultation happens or not. And then the consultation exempts that from being illegal. So here's a more visual, all that word salad I'm throwing at you. If it may affect, and then it goes to likely adversely affect unless you can show it's not likely to adversely affect. And if that is, it's a much shorter process. It's a letter of concurrence versus a formal biological opinion. One thing to note up there I've heard is there's been discussions on whether or not there are adverse effects to a species. So if there is a biological opinion, there is adverse effect to the species by definition. If somebody tries to say say an opinion says there's no adverse effects to the species, you can realize that is they're trying to mislead you, because otherwise we wouldn't have went through the process of doing that exercise. So that's kind of the questions. That back part's pretty darn dry. I'd be happy to answer any questions you want on either bull trout or the ESA.
I got one. Hey Ken, Sean Stash. You mentioned that the juvenile bull trout will stay in their natal streams for I think up to 3 years and 8.5 inches or something like that. So East River and potentially Big Creek are going to be important in the lower Priest River watershed. What role does the actual main stem of the lower Priest River play for these fish? What benefits does it provide?
Sure, that's going to be listed as FMO. So that's average. So fish, bull trout have been documented to wash out in as few as 0 years or stay as long as 5. So these are average, and it'd be great to know more about the outmigrants in this particular system, because I believe it is the only system that I'm aware of that bull trout do an upstream migration. So it is super different, and it'd be great to know more. Now, the lower Priest River, that's going to provide a migratory pathway both in and out of there, and it's also likely going to provide some sort of forage for these rearing fish as they leave their spawning streams and continue to head out. It'd be awesome to get more studies to know like how long they take, when do they tend to. Usually in a downstream migration, they just kind of flush out either if they feel like it or they tend to group around peak hydrographs, but they can kind of go at any time. It's likely this one might function the same, but there might be different life histories involved since they have an exceptionally long migration that ends up upstream, or they might just utilize different habitats. Really don't know. Giant question mark.
Again, this is Alan Songstad. I came in a little bit late, so I apologize. But so the lake trout in Priest Lake have had a negative effect on bull trout. Is the failure of Fish and Game to suppress lake trout, is that an ESA violation?
So IDFG manages the fish in their waters. It's not, and basically when a fish gets listed, it locks the regulations in place. So no, I've never heard that, but my gut feeling is no, that's not going to be an ESA violation. So we don't manage the listed species. They're the ones managing the listed species. And since it was kind of like that when it was listed, I imagine that stays in place. If they wanted to create a sport fishery, that would be a completely different thing. But as far as I know, no, that would be a unique interpretation that that would need to be tested.
Anybody else have a question? All right. This is a lot of really good information, Ken. I feel like I will have questions that start arising even more, like digesting it, sleeping on it. But yeah, thank you very much. And I'm glad this worked out for you to present still. And anybody, any final thoughts? No? All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks, Ken.
Happy to present. Sorry I couldn't make it.